Hello, I'm Joan Justice from HealthWorks Collective, and I'm speaking with John Holland, Senior Vice President, Business and Development and Research of AMC Health. AMC Health is a leading provider of telehealth solutions, and their remote patient monitoring systems are used by healthcare providers in post-discharge programs, chronic disease care, and they've also been used by pharmaceutical companies in clinical trials. In all instances, telemonitoring has been shown to improve quality and reduce costs. John, tell us a little bit about AMC Health and remote patient monitoring.
Well, we've been doing this for, I guess, since the mid-90s, if you include a company that we purchased. And then AMC Health itself started doing this in 2004. So we're one of the old timers in the field. We provide an array of services. We do remote biometric monitoring, so we monitor heart rate, blood pressure, blood sugar, oxygen saturation, temperature, a whole variety of things with little devices in the home. We also use interactive voice response to collect patient-reported symptoms typically, or if they're feeling better or worse. And these two kinds of data together, the objective biometric data and the subjective data on how the patient's feeling, give a very good window into how the patient is doing without actually having to go and visit them at home. Our customers originally were home care agencies where we could save some visits, and then expanded into things like integrated delivery networks, such as the Geisinger Health System. And then the most recent set of businesses we've been looking at are clinical trials, where we provide services for pharmaceutical companies.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about the post-discharge service for hospitals.
Well, as you know, 30-day readmission rates are a very hot-button issue.
Yes.
Right? And very often, patients are readmitted because of gaps in care. There's a study, I think, which shows that if a patient doesn't have a primary care provider appointment when they leave the hospital and doesn't make one, their chance of readmission is 10 times greater than if they see a physician for a follow-up visit. Same with post-discharge medication. Did you get a prescription? Did you fill your prescription? So with the Geisinger Health System had a very effective program where they had nurse case managers calling high-risk patients after they were discharged. They call once or twice a week to ask these questions. And then if there was a problem, they'd solve it. It was very effective, but when they tried to expand it, they realized that they didn't have the personnel to make all those phone calls. Because you don't just make one phone call.
Right.
You make a call and the line is busy. And you make another call and you get their answering machine. And we find that it actually takes 3.5 attempts to get through to somebody. So
That's
the
not
nurses
surprising.
were spending their time looking for gaps in care rather than closing gaps in care. And then Geisinger came to us and asked if we could co-develop this interactive voice response program. No devices in the home, just telephone. So our system now, when a patient is identified as high risk, calls them once or twice a week for the first month and asks us questions. Did you get a prescription? Did you fill it? You have a follow-up appointment. Are you going to be able to keep it? Do you need to get any lab tests or anything like that? And then it would ask a few questions about symptoms. So if it's a heart failure patient, ask if they have shortness of breath, ask if they have swelling, which indicates they're collecting fluid. Any wrong answer to one of those questions creates an alert, and the case manager calls the patient and fixes it. So if you figured that the readmission rate was about 30%, that means about a third of the calls that the nurses were making initially were to actually do something, and 2/3 were to find out that the patient was fine.
Yeah.
Now, they're only calling when there's a problem, so 100% of their calls are to solve the problem.
Yeah, much more efficient.
And the results have been striking. They published a study of this in medical care with 875 patients and about 2,000 matched controls. And they found that they reduced the readmission rate by close to 20%, and the risk of readmission was reduced by 44%. So that's rather large, and for a very low-cost program.
Yeah, it sounds great. Tell us a little bit about the Health Partners clinical trial in Minneapolis, the one with the pharmacists and blood pressure.
This was a very interesting study. Pharmacists are the most trusted professional in the United States in these surveys that get done every year. And they set up a program where they identified patients from their electronic health record who had hypertension and whose blood pressure was uncontrolled when they were in the office. So these are patients who are on treatment, their blood pressure is still not good, and they referred them to this study, asked if they wanted to participate. It was 400 some odd patients, fully controlled, randomized trial. So half the patients got the intervention, half the patients just got some education. And they had a blood pressure monitor at home. They'd monitor it a couple times a week. The data would then go to a pharmacist, not an MD. And the pharmacist had an agreement with the physicians that as long as they followed a particular protocol, they could adjust meds. And the result at 6 months was a 19 over 11 millimeter reduction in blood pressure. I may have that wrong, maybe 21 over 9, but at any rate, it's about 20 over about 10 millimeters reduction compared to a much smaller reduction in the control group. And that's what they published. They've analyzed the 12-month and 18-month data, and those results are still holding. So it was a pretty striking. To put it in context, if you did a clinical trial of a drug to control blood pressure versus placebo, you would not expect that much of a difference.
Yeah, great.
So it's about adherence, and then it's about getting the right drugs to the right patient.
And talking about clinical trials, wasn't there a clinical trial on lisinopril that the FDA just approved, telemonitoring?
Yes, we're very excited about that. For years, the whole clinical trial process is pretty badly broken. It's much too expensive, and so nobody's willing to invest in new drugs. The pipeline is drying up. There are thousands of promising drugs on people's shelves right now that won't get studied because it's too expensive. We just had a protocol approved by the FDA for a phase 2 trial to repurpose lisinopril, which is a commonly used ACE inhibitor, for multiple sclerosis. And what was exciting about this approval is almost all of the interactions in a year-long study are going to be remote. And it cut the cost of the study by about 2/3.
And made it easier for the patients, too.
Much easier for patients. Instead of coming in for 13 visits in a year-long trial, you're going to come in for 2. One on the first day, one on the last day.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. Well, I thank you so much, John, for this. I think that telemonitoring will become an integral part of our healthcare system, and actually it's really hard to imagine why it wouldn't. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. As my grandmother used to say, from your mouth to God's ears.